That's me. I do that with music, but I also am trying to do that with uh, politics and theology and some philosophy stuff. So tonight, the first topic we're going to talk about is where's my yeah, we got the whiteboard out, folks. We're gonna do a whiteboard presentation. Ah, oh, YouTube's bleeding through. Whoops, whoops, whoops. It's the highest level of production quality available, ladies and gentlemen. Uh, so I want to paint a picture here, and I'm a visual learner, but I'm a terrible artist. So I figured, hey, here's a whiteboard tool that might be able to help me kind of convey what I'm talking about. And what I'm talking about is the influencer, I guess, hierarchy. The way memetics is delivered uh, between people who are on the right dispositionally and people who are on the left. And we can kind of see the mechanics of this work. There's been a little bit of a kerfuffle coming out of the right wing X sphere surrounding Orrin McIntyre, and I think it highlights an underlying truth that we lack on the right. We lack a capacity for maintaining um, uh, effective gates. We lack a capacity for organizing the message. Right? You know, there's times where there's been controversy or PR issues, and I reach out to the parties involved, and I'm like, hey, what's the messaging, right? Because um, I believe in a movement. I'm not a shill for personalities per se, but if there are groups of people or individuals who are more successful propagandists for my beliefs and more convincing, um, then I am happy to defer to tactically to their preferences if in the case that the messaging is effective. And even in like couching my statement like that, I'm allowing myself an out because I believe that I possess the ability to like arbitrate which what what effective propaganda even is, right? Like I am assuming the capacity individually that I'm able to read the signs and tea leaves and have access to polling data and figure out like what the best way to engage the public consciousness is. How do we engage the egregore of civilization and people's minds, and develop within them a software update that aligns with our own ideas and our own goals? Leftists don't have that problem. So if I could describe leftist mimetic hierarchies, it'd be like this. It's just going to be a triangle, right? We got a nice little triangle. And up at the top is money, okay? Up at the top is all of the guys who have all of the money. And leftism is is both ideological and economic. It is a means of control. It is human cattle. It is human farming fundamentally, right? We need to obliterate hierarchy, make everyone interchangeable cogs within a system, and with obviously there's going to be exceptions to the cogs, right? Like Stalin was a communist, but he was also in charge of everybody, and the person who is allowed to be the exception or authorize the exception is the ruler. And so within that, you have a significant amount of capital. Now, the next rung down on the ladders is the administrators. Okay. So these are the idea people. These are the people that are funding pretty much everything downstream of the project. And I'm realizing that this is a little high. Well, the window doesn't go that much higher. Um, we'll say, whatever. So on the triangle, these are the administrators. These are the people that are receiving the vision and directive from the top of the pyramid, and they are creating effectively a mimetic casus belli to implement these objectives. So these are the people that are going to be within levers of power, especially within academia and within media, and within other fulcrums that interact with culture and with politics. And so these people are not necessarily filtering down the message. They are producing the conditions for which the message is going to thrive. So you can look at these as like college admins, right? And my handwriting is going to be terrible. But at some point, we woke up in the 1960s, and everybody that was in charge of a college or a professor at a college, or had a department of philosophy, psychology, or political theory within the American scholastic enterprise, they all were pretty much avowed communists. And what they were doing wasn't necessarily just preaching their worldview or their messaging to their students. They were also creating the conditions on campus for which that message could flourish mimetically. Okay, they were signing up to be the sponsors of clubs. They were doing, you know, whatever it took to keep uh, the institutional forces outside of away from interfering with people who would be the next rung down on the ladder. So you have the top of the pyramid, which is the money. You have the true believers within the administration of culture, and then you have the influencers. And the influencer's entire job is to influence. I know that's kind of a tautology, but what their entire role, and you can see this with guys like Hassan, Destiny, like people who are run the gambit on intelligence and I guess marketability. You have guys like Vosh that are notorious for um, being grotesque and having extremely questionable pornography habits. Um, their entire job is to filter what the admin is doing through whatever lens is most uh, appealing to their target demographics. See, these people are going to influence all sorts of niches, right? We could separate these out. These are going to be silos of influence. And so whether it's you have like some rap guys over here, you have like the college Ritalin addict over here, you have like the gamers, you have the furries, the LGBTQ people. They all have silos, and they all might be friends with each other. They might not be friends with each other. They might hate each other. Doesn't matter. The whole purpose is to simply filter what the overall trajectory for that set by the top of the pyramid and delivered into culture through the administrators of culture, and filter that in a way that is appealing to we'll call the bottom rung the masses. And so the masses respond to stimuli. The masses respond to controversy. The masses respond to sex and to status symbols and to economic incentives. And so all of what the masses want, what they want to respond to, is being driven by influencers who are propped up by money that is flowing from the top, by access that is given to them by the administrators. And it is a very coordinated system, even if it's not it's not like conspiratorial per se, although there are those as well. I mean, we saw with USAID going down and NGOs coming apart, how much money was being filtered into relatively small, meaningless media operations that would take over a specific niche within this influencer sphere. So, a little tiny corner over here, a little tiny channel with a very niche audience that is targeted and useful for some purpose to the admin was getting funded with millions and millions of dollars. During the Kamala Harris campaign, it was noted, you had YouTube podcasters and stuff with like 2,300 active regular listeners, like medium-sized podcasts were getting multi-million dollar valuations. And it was all because the people at the top were funneling money down through these administrators into organizations that would support the influencers. And one of the words we use for this is astroturfing. And what that means is that they are They do not grow up organically. They are they might have some talent or some like predisposition to an audience. They might have even cultivated a small audience on their own, but they are useful to an overall regime that is pushing a specific way of thinking, and therefore they become funded. Now, you'll notice with this, I'm couching this as leftists, but it's not just leftists that do this. I would argue that conservatives have done this as well and have been very successful at this part of the game. The conservatives, guys like Ben Shapiro, guys like Steven Crowder, uh, people who would rally around popular popular ideologies with people at the top of the pyramid. You know, we could call someone at the top, I don't know, Sheldon Adelson or Murdoch, um, or the Cox family. Um, there's plenty of billionaires to go around and plenty of blame. But with the conservative message, they're still doing this. They have the money at the top. They have academic institutions, and you know, with conservatives, the battlegrounds for most of the colleges, except for maybe the Ivies, was pretty much lost. You still had a thriving young Republican group, but conservatives operated primarily through think tanks. They had well-funded think tanks where they would get academics to come in and contribute white papers at this level. They had and they would cultivate new collegiate talent, like ISS, Bill Buckley's organization. You have some vestiges of the Cato Institute have overlap. You have the Claremont Institute. And these are organizations that are extremely well funded and extremely effective at generating a elite status or conservative beliefs, insofar as those beliefs are have appeal to the top of the pyramid. And so those organizations would filter through and fund projects and podcasters. We talked about astroturfing, but the difference is, you know, you would get guys like Daily Wire, like Steven Crowder, like probably The Blaze to some extent. Um, these organizations were extremely successful at capturing their niche audience. And unlike the leftists who were going for a more youthful appeal, the leftist boomer outreach on MSNBC and CNN was largely a disaster of the last 20 years. Conservatives were very well positioned through since the 1980s to reach a working white collar and blue collar audience in a two pronged attack between Fox News and some of these earlier influencers like Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity. And one of the other functions that is important within this structure is the influencers are effectively gatekeepers. They're gatekeeping in two directions. They are keeping the masses from having a full understanding, a full picture of what the administrators are doing and who is funding them, right? You can get signs and portents, and in that realm, we call them conspiracy theorists, the Art Bells and the Alex Jones of the world. You know, you might get a glimpse of what the Bilderberg Group is actually doing, or you might sneak into a Bohemian Grove like owl worshiping event or something, and you might get like a little sliver of truth out of that. But the influencers are gatekeepers to this information, unwittingly, probably in a lot of respect, but mostly because of social and economic incentives. These guys are incentivized to ensure that the masses are siloed, that they're filtering up into the influencer silos, but they're not escaping those silos. They're getting paid to ensure that these people are satiated with the information and the messaging that is passing from the administrators down through the influencers. And so they are effectively serving as a bulwark against, um, the masses from going up, and like holding them there mimetically. Okay. Additionally, the influencers are gatekeeping themselves, and that is done through social status, social incentives. You're not if you leave a certain sphere of acceptable beliefs within the influencer group, you're not going to be allowed to do collabs. You're not going to be allowed to you're going to have sponsors drop out. And all of that is coordinated by the top, by the administrators and by the money. Okay. And so it's a very well oiled system that has a lot of coordinating parts that flow up and down the pyramid. And the whole thing works because there is heavy coordination and heavy gatekeeping to ensure that no one ever gets to leave this farm. This is, like I said, leftism, conservatism as a subgroup of leftism is human farming. How do we farm attention? How do we farm labor? How do we farm every last drop of capital out of a country and shift it to where we want it to be to maximize what we view as the ultimate goal, which is efficiency towards our beliefs? Right wing and dissident communication is different. I think it is largely due to the fact that we are somewhat irascible generally. I think we are just different, have a different disposition. We value things. We don't necessarily value ideological purity. We value consistency, the ability to map onto truth and map onto our experience as data is and stimuli are continually absorbed. And so what it ends up being is the right wing is a bunch of Venn diagrams. Okay. Now you have guys that we'll call this Venn diagram nationalism, and we'll call this Venn diagram I don't know if this is it going to let me do. I wish I could just do a hollow circle. Oh well, you'll understand what I'm saying. This Venn diagram is like anti-Zionism. This part of the Venn diagram is like economic protectionism. And you see how all these little bubbles start to form. And it ends up just being a large amorphous mass of people with overlapping, closed-fisted beliefs, but that demur on one small issue or another. It just keeps going and going. You can pick any issue you want. And inside of all these different bubbles within the big, vast cloud that is right-wing thought, you have influencers. Okay. The problem with the right wing is that there is no structure to it. It is amorphous. It is nebulous. It is all over the place. And the only thing that really ties these groups together is overlapping ideology. Okay. And as we, the system incentivizes a drawing out from one bubble to the other, one bubble to the other, from one bubble to the other. And it goes in a cycle. Oh, this podcaster said something I didn't like, so I'm going to go to that podcast. Well, this podcaster said they don't agree with me on this, so I'm going to go here. This podcaster isn't a Christian, so I'm going to go to this podcaster. And it's just an ever continuing spiral. And it doesn't necessarily accumulate mass. That's the problem, is that this is all incestual. It is all orgiastic in and of itself. You have masses that are out there. The whole purpose of any sort of thought project, of any sort of political movement, is to get these guys to get on board with you, the masses, the people, the normies, right? And it's not that you need a high percentage of normies to have success, but what you do need that for them is to have a software update in their own mind to where your ideology isn't immediately dismissed as being something evil. And for a long time, that's what right-wing thought was. That's why smears against Buchanan worked. It was because any brush with any sort of idea that otherized different groups of people, whether or not they were U.S. citizens, but you could take the Israel issue for one, it is going to immediately put you as evil in the normal people's minds. You cannot have your ideas associated with evil while also be successful. That is why you are constantly seeing both these guys call these guys racists, Nazis, bigots, right? It is all because this cloud, this amorphous blob, um, is, we're scrambling to try to figure out the best way to get people on board. And if you can ascribe uh, an epithet that triggers the software and the normie to associate your group with evil, it's going to be a poison cloud that affects the entire nebulous right wing movement. And that's a problem. Poison cloud. It's losing its effect as the Trump election in 2024, COVID, like all these stochastic events within our recent history have driven people out of this pyramid. People have left because both groups didn't offer a praxis or a philosophical approach that answered the questions of the day when things got hard. And these guys all somewhat did. There was good Rumble podcasts, right, about Maha and being healthy and not taking the jab and all that stuff. There was good guys on that, and there was a lot of good guys on that, right? And some people filtered into, well, I'm going to be a crunchy granola person. Well, now I'm going to find some homesteading content. Well, the homesteader is now like blaspheming Jesus, so I'm going to go over to like the right wing Substack group that's like talking about Curtis Yarvin, and so there has been accumulations of groups of people, but we're filtering the masses into bubbles, and the bubbles get bigger and smaller and bigger and smaller, and it's just cyclical. There's no hierarchy, and more importantly, everyone wants to be king of their own bubble. If you become a big fish within these bubbles, you begin to think of yourself as a thought leader and as someone who can set the agenda and as someone who can gatekeep, as someone who wants to go around with the thumbtack and start popping other people's bubbles because you think your bubble will get bigger once that other bubbles pop. And we see this a lot with the backbiting, with the vitriol that's pointed at the right. No one hates a right winger more than another right winger. Whether it's, you could think of countless other groups. You could the pagan larpers and versus the what they call the Christ cocks, right? The ortho bros and the tradcaths versus the Protestants, the Christian nationalists versus the I don't know, the Nat sock guys, like the paleocons versus the ethno nationalist types. They all, it's constant. It's constant backbiting, and it turns out where it's just a power struggle to see who can get the bigger bubble. There is no consistent message that filters all the way through down to the masses. There's no delivery mechanism. There's no way to synthesize the amorphous blob and provide it in a package that works for the masses. This is why we don't have right wing movies. This is why we don't have right wing culture. We have subcultures. We have subgroups. We have like disparate, mimetic, and viral things that happen, but there's no consistent delivery. And so this is bad propaganda, right? The hope was that Trump was going to fix this, was that Trump was going to be the guy that could get the podcast bros and the libertarians and the Christian nationalists, get everybody on board and set a consistent message that would get filtered through these bubbles and ultimately make their way down into the masses. Problem was, Trump's comms team failed too. And this is a true thing that people need to understand. Trump's PR team, whether it was Susie Wild or Wiles or Trump himself or his staffers, they have put out very viral propaganda. They have done good tweets, making fun of Destiny, like the death of Bungie's game Destiny. that one, I was tickled about that for a while. It's not just about making memes, though. It is about manufacturing and monitoring a consistent message that is able to filter through influencer spheres into different demographic silos that follow those spheres. And when all of your influencers that manage these spheres are all constantly fighting with each other to see who is going to be the king of the dogs and the prince of the gutter, it all falls apart. So my proposal for the right wing is Protestant Epstein. I know what you're thinking. What? Paca? You don't mean a real Protestant Epstein, right? I kind of do. Not necessarily within like the sex trafficking and the having a weird Temple Island thing and doing lewd and lascivious things with minors. No, not at all within that respect. But what the function of the effectively the spy master, the propaganda master. You can call it Protestant Goebbels if you want, but that's probably not the best image to go with. Protestant Epstein is someone who can take the cloud and start buying, right? Protestant Epstein has access to money. That's number one. How do you get that money? I don't know. You need patronage. Like Elon Musk would probably be a good bet for that patronage. But once you have money, what do? You start picking off influencers. You start buying them. You start putting them in think tanks. You corral them. And you allow them to have access to information. You give them the gospel writ, the holy truth that comes down from the Trump admin. Hey guys, you are all under NDA now. You've joined our think tank. You've signed our contracts. You're on our payroll. Now you don't get to talk about the things we don't want you to talk about. And we're going to tell you the truth. We're going to tell you what our goals are for this administration and what are the things that we want you to talk about. And you control the messaging. And I know it all sounds very uncouth and undemocratic, but this is how propaganda works. This is realpolitik. There's always someone controlling the message. Even your most independent thinkers. They all have sponsors. They all have bills to pay. And even if it's innocent, right? We're gonna give Oren McIntyre and Captain's Dreamer and Pop Alpaca. We're gonna give them a $50,000 a year stipend to attend our conferences for this think tank. They're gonna become ambassadors for our think tank. We're going to have them co-sponsor a few white papers that have to do with some policy objectives. We'd like some academic, oomph behind. We're going to get, I don't know, pick people. I'm just hypothetically, we're going to get these people all in a room. We're going to come up with some policy, put their real names to it, and then they can be free to run to their podcasts and sell the policy as if it was their idea. That's the important part. Is that you want to this isn't you're not the perception of the move is that you're not buying people. You are patronizing them and making your ideas their ideas, convincing them to believe that, hey, we want mass deportation, we have to sell it to the public. Here's what what do you think about messaging? You get their feedback, you tailor their feedback to so that it aligns with your desired outcomes, and then you convince them. You let them loose and say, like, oh, this is all your idea. Good job. Let's have a white paper, and then you can promote the policy. The other function is gatekeeping, and I don't mean that across ideological lines. What I mean is that you need to wrangle the retards, because there are too many idiots in a lot of these bubbles, man. They're just silly people, little micro niche celebrities. And what they're really, really good at is creating a stink online. They're able to retweet a news article with a false frame or take a screenshot of a press conference and convince, and somehow get like millions of views and engagements with limited reach. And they're allowed to do damage. Like they have the capacity to do significant damage to the unified messaging. So part of that is you need to gatekeep. You need to keep people out. And you also need to use your radicals. Okay? There are going to be people who are going to say wild shit. They're going to go out and shake the trees. They're going to say stuff that is very outside the scope of normal, decent public discourse. They're going to say stuff that's outside the zeitgeist. And we can point to people that are polemic in this way. whatever influence Nick Fuentes used to have. Guys like I don't know. For me, it was like Devin Stack, or if you have if you have a guy like Jake Shields running around that has an audience, there's ways that you would need to wrangle them, and help them kind of um, sharpen their presentation, maybe. But you also need them to be able to be in a cushy cell, where they can go and cause a big ruckus and do their thing, but it's not going to have the infinite PR blowback on you when inevitably they start spiraling. There needs to be probably a kill switch or a shut off valve that allows them that provides them with economic and social incentive to kind of stay on the reservation a little bit. Like, you can go be crazy about Israel, or go say stuff that's kind of wild about race, or gay people, whatever. Like, you're off the res, but you're directionally correct. But if you start going against the admin, there's going to be probably some pay cuts, some loss of sponsorship, some status like removal. And I don't even know if this is possible in the current the current realm, because of how spread out and niche all these right wing groups are, all these Rumble podcasts and that sort of thing, all these damn alpacas trying to do some content just to keep just because he enjoys it, I guess. I don't know. So the the best start would be to start patronage networks. We need to start mirroring the tactics of our enemies, because our enemies have been kicking our asses for 100 years now. And so maybe they have a point. Maybe there is a need for us to seek out patronage, to mobilize our group, to mobilize right wing capital into projects, into think tanks, into things that will generate status and gravitas for our thought leaders, and thus enable those thought leaders to prepare the best presentation of our ideas further down the line. And ultimately, this is one of the tweets that, I've been saying this for a while. I think Aesthetica hit the nail on the head tonight. Mr. Grove is right, of course, but the reason why this is happening, and it's talking about like the discourse and all that, is because the left-wing commentary class are on the payroll of the Democrat Party, whereas the right-wing commentary class are just randoms on social media. In the 2024 election, Democrats paid left-wing influencers with as little as a few thousand followers huge sums of money to shill for Kamala. The right doesn't even pay our most influential people. And this is true. We need patronage. And from the patron's perspective, it's going to look like you're buying bubbles. You're investing in these bubbles. You're picking out the top talent out of each of these bubbles. You're creating your own little cast of bubble managers. And if you're able to, apply enough pressure and deploy enough capital into this bubble, you're probably going to end up with something similar to this. A much more neat and robust system where your message, as the policy setters, as the academic class, as the administrators, is going to be filtered into the masses regularly, allowing them to have regular software updates on everything that's going on. So we hit the discourse, we hit trying to visualize right wing and left wing, I guess, influencer and the cycle of memetics. The last thing I want to touch on is no half measures. Okay, we'll go back to my monologue page. So, in many respects, the U.S. is ahead of Europe and Australia and Canada. We're like 10 years ahead politically. However, in terms of like race relations and immigration, the UK has kind of been ahead of us. They never had slavery really within the United Kingdom. They never really had a diaspora of people that were living amongst them, and so they kind of had their moment of mass migration in right after World War II. Apologize. Little sip of the silly. So the British Nationality Act in 1948 um, expanded citizenship to all corners of the Commonwealth. So that means if you were in within the global sphere of the British Crown, you were a citizen of the Commonwealth and had a right to move to Britain. So you could jump ship from Hindustan all the way up to settle in London without any sort of additional paperwork, and it opened the door to a period uh, of really uh, big pushes for immigration throughout the 50s and 60s. And in the 50s, the Windrush era migration accelerated because, the wars killed off most of their labor force or a significant chunk of their labor force. And so it's either just pay America whatever she wants to import, or you have to rebuild your own domestic labor force. And instead of, uh, doing it organically, the God given way in which you promote marriage and big families, they went for the route of international labor. Um, the first major restriction that they did is that immigration causes the same problems everywhere. Your wages stagnate. People can't afford homes and can't afford to live on their wages. You end up with demographic issues and neighborhoods that are being subsumed by diaspora politics and all of the lovely cultural accoutrement of diversity. So, the conservatives in 1962 had the Commonwealth Immigrants Act, which was it induces work vouchers for most Commonwealth migrants. So if you were going to come, you couldn't come and subside off the social purse. You had to have a job lined up effectively. In 65 through 68, under the Labor Party, um, they maintained immigrant restrictions. So even Labor was maintaining certain restrictions while introducing race relations legislation. So they were they were doing tighter entry controls, but also putting in place the similar to what the U.S. was doing during the Civil Rights Act. They were putting anti-discriminatory laws in place, which really were just protections for the growing diaspora neighborhoods that were beginning to exist within the UK. In 68, the Commonwealth Immigrants Act of 1968 limits entry to mainly those with UK born parents or grandparents. So this was a sharp return to effectively a blood based immigration system. You had to have UK parents. And this was following mass migration from Kenya's uh, British community. And yeah, and then in 1971, conservatives had another act where it creates a modern immigration framework and formalizes the right of abode. It ends effectively ending all Commonwealth migration. So it didn't really matter if you were a citizen of the British Empire. Were you're not going. You have no right to move to Britain. Um, in 74 through 79, the Labor Party considered repealing, but ultimately maintained it because it was popular. They wanted to expand immigration again, but ultimately they didn't have the popular will for it. Under Thatcher in 81, the British Nationality Act narrowed citizenship um, and distinguished British citizens from Commonwealth status. So this was further delineating that if you are in Mumbai, living under the protectorate of the British Empire, you are not automatically a citizen. And then throughout the 1980s and 1990s, primary purpose rule and tougher family migration, they spent 20 to 30 years tightening immigration, and it was both labor and conservatives. Did they go far enough though? Was this a half measure? Was it enough to just stem the tide of new entry? Or did something else need to happen? Well, in 1997, Tony Blair abolishes the primary purpose rule and begins a managed migration strategy. He expands. In 2001, labor expands the work visa programs for skilled and low skilled labor. Um, They did tighten some asylum procedures, but as long as it's similar to America's H-1B, where it's like as long as you say that you have a degree or you have a skill that is needed within the economy, which can be anything, and the people from parts unknown generally don't have any compunctions about lying. You could still get a visa. Um, and then in 2002, the Nationality and Immigration and Asylum Act. Um, Again, it's one of those things where you're shifting. It's all just numbers on a balance sheet, and the asylum number is unpopular with people, especially in the wake of 9/11. It's so they shifted away from the unpopular category, but put all of those people, a significant amount of overlap out of asylum and into labor. Um, but they did have a means now to speed the removal of like false asylums, false asylum claims and that. And I wonder how many people were deported. Because that'd be something interesting. But yeah, so during this time period, they were deporting maybe 21,000 people a year in forced removals. Um, but uh, some of these numbers include voluntary departures as well. So there was some deportations, still wide open borders for economic purposes. And then labor in 2004 chose to not impose a transnational labor restriction on workers from most of the new Eastern European member states after the EU enlargement. Um, so the EU or the UK ended up receiving far higher migration from places like Poland and the Baltic states, while also maintaining a robust pipeline for third world immigrants. And then, lastly, in 2008, under Labor, they developed a points based immigration system similar to the American quota system that was developed, um, which was, hope marketed as a means of substantially reducing immigration. But, obviously the points are allocated based on your political preference at the time. And one thing that one of the big controversies that contributed to um, part of the UK leaving the EU and Nigel Farage's um, Brexit movement, because you had guys like this. Um, eh, a former government advisor wrote a piece claiming that New Labour's immigration policy was intended, even if it wasn't its main purpose, to rub the right's nose in diversity and render their arguments out of date. So a big part of this, and they go on to explain, oh, that's taken out of context, we don't really know who said it, it was one of those things like maybe a little bit, um, but this is what immigration has always been. It is a economic tool, but it is also a political tool, and labor was realized that they had the ability to maintain or to continue to grow with this new diaspora that was coming in and replacing white people. um, so what what does that mean? What does it mean to game out a half measure in immigration? I think the Trump administration is doing more than any other president in my lifetime to deport people, to make it easier to deport people. You have the Supreme Court siding with the Trump admin on many of these deportations. We have incredible rulings that are coming down. We have tens of thousands of officers, law enforcement officers that are trained and deployed and in the field and currently removing um, dozens of people a day. And ultimately, if we're able to continue with the ramp up and if the public approval for the process continues, um, ultimately we'll see millions of people leave the U.S. Problem is that there's tens of millions, if not 100 million people that are here that should not be here. They came illegally. They were granted some sort of like benefit, or the government looked the other way, or they lied on their visas, or there's running any number of scams. They don't deserve to be here. they're parasites on the corpse of the rotting corpse of America. And what happens if we're successful? If we end up removing, millions and millions of people, there's still tens of millions of people left. There's still hundreds of millions of people, especially if we never pass the Save Act and the elections aren't secure and there's no means to verify whether or not actual citizens are voting in these elections. What happens as soon as the left returns to power? Because the pendulum always swings. You know, the whole purpose of political power is to ensure that it is difficult for your opponents to win. And so there is a need to temper criticism against the Trump admin. They came out, they are completely changing the paradigm that has existed in America since the 1960s vis-a-vis immigration. Our refugees are all white South African. They're like South Afrikaners. Okay. That is huge. All of, the H-1B stuff, the Chinese student stuff, that's all bad. There shouldn't be a single Chinese student in America. We should not be training the people that are going to go back to the CCP and give them our secrets and make them better than us. The CCP, China was an emerging market forever. They were just a labor state. They were able to put widgets together, and now because of their spying program and the area of communism, and with coordination from various parties in the Middle East, one of which is our greatest ally, and with coordination with communists and activists within our academic system, and our lax border controls and IP controls. China has, completely turned around their economy largely based on stuff that they've stolen from the West, ideas and products and infrastructure. So what do we do with half measures, man? That's the problem. Do you think as soon as pendulum swings, they're gonna maintain the regime of deportations, or do you think the next person is gonna be like Biden? It wasn't Biden that was making any decisions. It was functionaries. It was the people at that top of the pyramid. It was the moneyed interest that was controlling the admins. Biden was just the guy signing with the auto pen. So what happens when those guys get their immigration regime back? What happens when the Koch brothers and the Cato Institute want to maintain stagnant wages, and the guys, all of these publicly traded builders want to continually build infinity stick homes out in rows and rows and rows of these communities dotting the countryside, spreading across our great and beautiful nation like a tumor. You think they're just going to reopen the floodgates back and we'll be back to square one? What do you think? What do you think happens to? You think some of the people that were part of the Pakistani rape gangs in the UK? Do you think a lot of them were children of people that came during lax periods of UK immigration but weren't effectively deported? Do you think they all just kind of materialized in the soil and automatically had networks where you could coordinate between police officers and social workers to bring you an underage girl, and they'll just tell the media, oh, she was a prostitute, whatever. The problem is diaspora politics stays, and the problems of diversity stay. They stay in your country. They hold on like a tick. Doesn't matter if you reduce the amount of new entries. It doesn't matter if you deport some of them. You got to get most. You got to get all. You have to reclaim the demographics of your country, or this is a problem that you will not solve. And so I think my messaging on this, and I think most people, who are intelligent in our sphere, these are guys that are going to say, Trump is doing awesome. He's doing better than any other president has done in my lifetime. He's done better than any president since my parents' lifetime, probably my grandparents' lifetime. But it's not enough, you know. And I'm very grateful for the hard work that ICE is doing. Very grateful for the hard work that the admin is doing. It's just it's a dangerous thing to leave a job half done. And so, no half measures. Anyway, that's tonight's Paca cast. Thank you for stopping by. Y'all have a really, really great week.